Morning, everybody. So we're going to be doing some work with simultaneous equations again. This is the final kind of like tutorial-esque video, I guess, to do with simultaneous equations. There will be one other video that we do with simultaneous equations, which will be thinking about what is it they're actually doing, and thinking about some of the extra things around them. But this video today is going to be looking at one of the more complex things that we do with solving simultaneous equations, or it is the types of equation that we all want to solve simultaneously. Okay, what we're going to be looking at is where we've got one equation which is linear, so like the equations that we've seen already, they just involve x's or y's or both. And we're going to have one equation which is non-linear, okay, and that will involve something which has squareds or, God forbid, even cubes, okay. But we're going to be focusing on squareds, okay. I think that's the only thing. We only need to go that far for GCSE, okay. So as normal, I'm going to show you the method for how we do it. Going to give you a chance to have a go at it yourself. We're going to see a couple of different variations just so we can get kind of our awareness of what to do, how these things may look different, all that kind of stuff, and generally go through the topic. So let's get on with it. Okay. So even before we start these questions, I'm just going to backpedal to a previous slide. Okay, now we looked at this slide in our previous video. The video where we looked at solving equations using a substitution method. Okay, and what we did when we were looking to do get back here. When we were looking to solve equations using a substitution method, was that we would look for one letter, or one variable, which had just one of it. Okay, so in this case, the only variable that we've got which has one of it, even though it's negative, was this one, the bottom one. And we rearranged it so that we made that thing the subject. Okay, making sure it's not negative, it's positive. That's the thing that we would want. And what we did was that we used that equation in the other one. Okay, we substituted it to use it in the other equation. Okay. We would then have an equation that we would be able to solve, and then we would use the thing that we got to work out the other variable. Okay. And this was the process that we went through, and we saw that sometimes we could have more than one substitution that we could make, and we would still arrive at the same answers. Okay. We also saw that sometimes the substitutions wouldn't be nice, and that we would refer to, and we would think about perhaps using our other method for solving simultaneous equations called solving by elimination, which is in a separate video altogether. The problem that we have, though, with these other equations, the ones which we're going to focus on today, we can't use elimination methods to be able to solve these, because no matter what we multiply by, we would be left with something which we can't get rid of. I'll just quickly show you what I mean. If we took this bottom equation and times it by x to make it so that I had x squareds in both equations, I wouldn't just have x squared, but I'd have yx plus 2x squared plus 14x. And in this equation, I'd be left with a yx which doesn't exist in this equation. Okay, so I can't use an elimination style method to work with these. Okay, I must use a substitution. Okay. Which is why we looked at the substitution method in that previous video. So what we're going to do, we're going to have to look for an equation that we're going to substitute in. Okay. And for the equations that we have here, actually, the substitution is really nice. Okay, rather than substituting, I'm just going to write sub in for short. Okay. For these two equations, I've got my top one, which says y equals something, and I've got my bottom one, which says y equals something. So I've already got something which is the subject, which is what we looked to do in our previous things. We would select an equation to rearrange and make y the subject or x the subject, depending on the order that we want to do things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the bottom one and sub into the top. Okay. So that way, wherever there was a y, I'm going to replace it with 2x plus 14. So we're going to have 2x plus 14 is equal to x squared plus 8x plus 19. And just to clean things up, I'm going to, because we've got x's on both sides, numbers on both sides, I'm going to get everything together, all on the same side of the equal sign, just so I can see what it is that we've actually got. So we're going to take away 2x from both sides, and we're also going to take away 14 from both sides. Okay? So that would leave me with nothing on this side, which is good. X squared, 8x take away 2x is 6x, positive 6x. And we're going to have 19 take away 14, which is just 5. Okay? Now at this point, we've got equations. We have those there. What we want to do now is to be able to solve that quadratic using either factorizing, completing the square, or the formula. That's meant to be a square. That says something completely different. Okay, let's actually make that a square. Okay, or the formula. Okay, because all of those things will do slightly different methods, but they will always give us solutions to this quadratic. Now, being able to factorize here is probably really useful and really important. You can always use the formula. You might even be able to use your calculator if you've got one of the fancier calculators, but factorizing is always generally a good bet, okay? And worth checking the numbers for. Because for this equation, we would want things that multiply together to give us 5, but that add up to give us 6. And that is something which is totally doable. Okay, so we want multiply to equal 5 and add to equal 6. Well, we could just use 5 and 1. Which means that our brackets are going to be x plus 5 and x plus 1. Okay. And if you're not sure about your solving of quadratics, at this point, we say, okay, we're going to let each bracket equal 0. So that way we're going to get 2 values of x. Okay. So if this bracket equaled 0, we'd have x plus 5 equals 0, which means that x equals negative 5. And if this bracket equals 0, we'd have x plus 1 is 0. Or x is equal to negative 1. Okay? So we've got 2 values of x, whereas before we only had 1 value of x. And that's because we have a quadratic equation involved. Okay? The quadratic means that we would normally get 2 solutions to this. Okay? So now we have one thing left to do. We've got to find out our y values. Okay. So we may as well use that bottom formula because it's simpler and it already says y equals something. So we're going to use both x values in that formula to find out what our y values are. So we're going to have 2 lots of negative 5 plus 14. We're going to have 2 lots of negative 1 plus 14. So for this y value, 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Add 14 just gives us a nice 4. And 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. Add 14 is a nice 12. Okay. Now, something which I would do with these, which I might not necessarily do, but can do with normal simultaneous equations, is I would write these answers in a pair, or even as a coordinate. For instance, I would say negative 5, 4, and negative 1, 12 are solutions. Okay, and in our next video that I was mentioning about before, we'll explore what that actually, we'll explore what that actually means, okay? Now, because these things are quite involved, they normally involve quite a lot of marks, okay, and there is a lot of processes involved, but let's think about each separate bit together first, okay? We have this first point: substitution, rearranging, and simplifying. Okay, we substitute in, get everything together, see what we've got. We need to solve a quadratic. Okay, now if your factorizing isn't perhaps your favorite and you're not sure what's going on with completing the square, make sure you know how to use the formula. Okay, you will need to use one of those methods to get you some form of answer. Okay? And remember, if you're using the formula and it's saying to you syntax error or math error, that means that something has gone wrong along the way and you need to check to see what's going wrong. Okay? Solving those quadratics to give you up to 2 answers. Okay? And then taking each answer that we got before separately to create a pair of answers. Okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you for a decent chunk of time, okay? I say leave you, I say I'm going to leave you in the hands of future me, okay? I'm going to put a timer for a little bit longer than I normally would in these kind of videos, but I think it's worth it. So we're going to stick a timer for 5 minutes, okay? And in that 5 minutes, we're going to have a go at these questions that are on here, all right? Feel free to ask questions if you need to, or say, I've got to this point but don't know what to do next, okay? Because future me, who should be there, definitely should be there, will be able to help you out along the way, okay? So give it a go, see where you end up with, okay? And I'll leave all this stuff here so that you can see just exactly what the method was, okay? Okay, so 5 minutes has passed. Okay, and what I'm going to do in the interest of just keeping things moving is that I'm going to start making my way through things. But if you're still working your way through the problem, feel free to mute me for a few minutes, because then you'll be able to see what's going on. But if you have reached a sticking point and you're stuck and not sure where to go next, make sure that you watch carefully. Okay? So our first step is the same as we had before. We want to look for an equation to substitute in. And just as we had last time, it doesn't really matter, because we've got both equations which have y as being the subject. We'll see an equation in a minute which it will matter. Okay? So let's for just for the ease of doing the same as we did before, let's take the bottom equation, our linear equation, and use it in the top equation, our non-linear equation. Okay, so we're going to do bottom into top. Okay, so what we're going to end up with is 3x take away 6 is equal to x squared take away 4x plus 4. And just as we did before, what we're going to do is we're going to take away, we're going to rearrange stuff so we've got everything all together, okay? Just to make it easier to see what we've got. So I'm going to be taking away 3x from both sides, and I'm going to be adding 6 to both sides, okay? And what that gives me is x squared. Negative 4, take off another 3 is negative 7, and 4 plus 6 is 10. Okay, that is equal to 0. So that is our quadratic, which leads us to our second stage, which is to solve that quadratic. Okay. And just as before, we could use factorizing, completing the square, or the formula to solve our quadratic. And once again, I am going to factorize. Okay? Because that is a non-calculator skill, and it's worth practicing. Okay? So I want two things that multiply together to give me 10. Okay? The multiple of the a coefficient and the very end, and I want two things which add up to give us negative 7. Now, first of all, two things that multiply to give us 10. I've got 1 and 10, but I can't use those to give me 7. And the only other option I've got is 5 times 2. And the way that I can get negative 7 from 5 and 2 is if they are both negative. Now, negative times a negative is a positive, so that is exactly the situation we want. Okay, this is going to be x take away 5, x take away 2 in brackets like that. Okay, and if you're not happy on your factorizing, I would suggest that maybe you would want to have a look at that. I think there's loads of stuff on Hegarty to do with factorizing. You can just search it in the top bar, it'll come up. Okay. Now, where do we go from here? We say, what if each bracket equals 0? Okay. And then we can only do that if it says 0 here. So, x take away 5. If that is equal to 0, that means that x is equal to 5. And if x take away 2 is equal to 0, that means that x must be equal to 2. Now we've got our final stage coming up. Find our y values. And again, we'll probably want to do this in pairs. So I'm going to do that one over here and that one over there. So if x is equal to 5, I'm going to have y is equal to 3 lots of 5. Take away 6 by using the bottom equation in the pair that we started with. 3 times 5 is 15. Take away 6, 9. When x is equal to 2, I've got y is 3 lots of 2, take away 6, which is 6 take away 6, which equals 0. And just to keep things nice and tidy, I'm going to write my answers in pairs. So when x is 5, y is 9. And when x is 2, y is 0. Those are our two solutions. Okay, and you can see that if you write things out properly and you go through it, these questions can take a good 5 minutes. Okay, and that's a 5 minutes of solid work, not 5 minutes of like, thinking, maybe trying something out. These can take a while. Okay. So what I want to know from you guys at this point is, how are we doing? Okay, are we doing all right? Are things making sense? Are they not making sense? Which bit is the hardest bit? Which bit is the easiest bits? If things are all good, just stick a thumbs up in the live chat if you're here live. Think about what you're doing if you're watching it after the fact. How are we doing? Hopefully that's enough time. Okay. Because although those two questions are perfectly decent questions, the format that we're giving them might be slightly different. And so we might have to recognize that we still need to do this stuff, but we might need to be careful about how we start it off. Okay? So we could have something like this, or like either of these. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go through all of them from start to finish exactly, because this video would get quite long. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to outline why these are different to those, and how do we at least get to the point where we're solving a quadratic. Because once we got to the point where we solve the quadratic, everything else in terms of method is the same. Okay? Now, starting with the one on this, on the left-hand side here, our first thing is to look for an equation to substitute. Okay, look for an equation to sub in. Now, in this case, we don't have an equation which just says, like, y equals something or x equals something. Okay, we've got one which says x squared plus y squared, which in itself is different. And we've got one underneath which says x plus y equals 4. Okay. Now, if I cast your mind back to these, our simpler simultaneous equations, we had to do some rearranging in order to end up with something which was the subject. So we're going to have to do that. Now, I'm going to rearrange the bottom equation. And the reason for that is because it's the linear one. It's the simpler equation to start working with. Okay? And if you can, working with your equation which has as few powers as possible is generally the good place to start. Okay? And we might think, okay, which letter are we going to make the subject? We could do what we did in our previous questions and make y the subject, in which case we'll be finding our x values first. But we could make x the subject and find our y values first. That, it doesn't matter. Okay, it just means that things will come out in the reverse order. Okay? And just for the sake of, exploring different things, we're going to make x the subject by taking away y from both sides. So here's an equation which I'm going to use to substitute in. Okay? And when I do that, I'm substituting it into my more complicated equation. Okay? So wherever there was an x, I'm now going to replace it with 4 take away y. Now, important thing. When I'm going to be putting that in, I must stick brackets around it, because this is saying x is being squared. We're replacing x with all of this, so all of that needs to be squared. Now this is a bracket to expand. Okay, like that. And it's at this point where you'd need to know your expanding bracket skills. You can see now these are quite high order questions. They involve lots of different skills. Okay. Multiplying first, outer, inner, last, or drawing your connections in, whichever your method is for expanding brackets, make sure that you use them. Okay. Make sure that you use your methods. Okay. 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times negative y is negative 4y, and we got another negative 4y, which gives us negative 8y. Y times y, y squared. Sorry, negative y times negative y, y squared. Now at this point, this is very similar to the line that we've got here. Okay, we are in the point where we want to start simplifying things. Okay, get everything onto one side of the equal sign. Make it so that everything is as simplified as possible. So, we've got y squared plus y squared, which is 2y squared. We got no other y, so we're keeping our negative 8y. I got 16 over here and 40 over there. Now I want to make it so this thing equals 0. So what I'm going to have to do here is to take away 40 from both sides. So 16 take away 40, that's going to give us negative 24. So there is our quadratic. And now we would look to solve that quadratic. Now the fact here that I've got equations which will give me 2y squared, which means that I know that these brackets are going to be either a 2y and a y. I'm expecting it to come out something like that. But you don't have to factorize. You could use the quadratic formula. Okay, you could use your quadratic formula, where your y squared number is your a's, your y's is your b, and the number you're left with is your c. Okay, you could look to solve that by using the formula. Okay, now, just for the sake of getting to a point where we could find out our y values, I am going to look to factorize, okay? And as I said, we know that these brackets are going to be 2y and y equals 0. Now this means that 2 times something plus 1 times something else will equal negative 8, where these two numbers multiplied together equals negative 24. Okay, so some experimentation. 6 and 4 would get 6 times 4 is negative 24. So 2 lots of negative 6 would be negative 12. Plus 1 lot of 4, which would be there we go. First time. So we're going to have negative 6 times 4, which would get us negative 24. 2 lots of negative 6 is negative 12. 1 lot of 4 is 4, which when we add them together gets us negative 8. And if you remember for when we use this strategy, these numbers have got to go in their opposite brackets. So I'm going to have y take away 6 over here and 2y plus 4 in that bracket. Okay? If you're not sure about that step, it's something that we have done in class, but it's something that you may want to revisit, okay? And again, Hegarty has stuff for doing this. Then we say, what if each bracket equals 0? So 2y plus 4 equals 0. Or y take away 6 equals 0. Okay, and then from that point, we're here essentially now. Down there, the workings that we've got so far, that is this stage here. Okay, we've had to go through a lot more than we did previously, but we're now at this stage, and finding our y values is probably the easiest bit of this whole thing. Okay, now we have found out what our y values are here, so we're looking to find our x values. We've done everything in a kind of reverse process. Okay. This last one, this one over here, again, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm looking to get us to a point where we kind of know where we are with it. Very similar to this one. Okay, we do have a subject for our equation which doesn't have powers in, so that's a nice thing. That's very generous. But what we have here is something which is like y squared equals something else. What we're going to have is a very similar situation to this thing here. Okay? So what we're going to have is substituting in that one into that one. Okay? Because there's that squared, we must put a bracket around what we're substituting. Okay? Which means that we've got to expand this bracket. Remember, if you've got a bracket squared, that means you're multiplying that bracket by itself. Expand that bracket. And then look to solve your, simplify, rearrange your equation. Okay, so we got x, we're going to have to take away 4x and take away 5 from both sides. 4x take away 4x is 0. 4 take away 5 is -1. So you got x squared take away 1 is equal to 0. Okay. So again, if you're factorizing, we're thinking 2 brackets. We don't have any numbers in front of the x squared, so we know that x times x will give us x squared. I want 2 numbers which will multiply together to give me -1, but that add up to give me 0. That's the only combination that we've got. Okay? Now from there, we go through the same method as we did before. Okay? These are not straightforward questions. These take a lot of thinking about. These take a lot of stages of working, and I would really encourage you not to skip out on any of those stages of working, because they are really important to helping you get through these questions, which are, as I said, not straightforward. Okay? So, there's going to be one more video on simultaneous equations, okay? And they're going to be like bonus things, so throwing a little bit more understanding in there, but also how can we use some technology to help us with this, okay? Because where there is technology, the way we can use it, we should look to do so. Okay. If you want to finish off those 2 and send me a photo of the workings, I will happily check it for you to make sure that everything has gone smoothly. Otherwise, that will be that. Now, I did not set a quiz on this, on Hegarty. I did not set a quiz on this. And that's because I wanted people to have time to digest this before I set a quiz on this ready for next week. Okay, so that will be coming next week. If you have any questions, make sure you ask. I'm going to kind of have an awkward silence moment at the end of this video, just in case people have questions. But at this point, the video is kind of over. Okay, I've got nothing more to show you for today. Okay. So if you are done with this video, feel free to enjoy the rest of your day. I will see you some other time. And here is your awkward silence moment.